Hey everyone, Eric here. Thank you very much for joining me on WDIM News, my weekly podcast where I talk about science fiction, movie, and TV news. This was a really big week for science fiction, with the release of the first episode of the final season of Star Trek PICARD, as well as the release of the film Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So I'm going to do reviews of both of those, but I'm going to split it up into spoiler and non-spoiler sections and put the time codes below in the description. So if you want to jump around, you can check out those time codes below. I also want to talk about some very interesting news in the world of Star Trek, and that being when the shows will be released in 2023. So far, we don't know what's going to be released after Star Trek Picard, but thanks to a tweet from Wilson Cruz, one of the stars of Discovery, and an illustrator working on Lower Decks, we might now be able to piece together when these shows will be released. I also want to talk about some really cool movie trailers that were released last week, those being for The Flash and Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And I also want to discuss this really interesting story about a sequel to a film that was announced last week that stars Will Smith. But the most interesting part about it is that the sequel is ignoring the ending of the original, and instead it's going to be based on the alternate ending. So I want to talk about that because it's kind of crazy. But first, let's talk about Star Trek Picard. Finally, we've got the first episode of Star Trek Picard. Myself and a lot of fans have been waiting for this for a long time. I mean, even the actors and the producers on the show have been waiting for it for a long time, because I believe it's been done and in the can for almost a year. They filmed it right after the second season of Picard, so really they've just been touching it up since then. Right now we're in the non-spoiler section of the review, so what I will say to that is that overall I enjoyed the episode, but I didn't think it was the best Star Trek ever. I've seen a lot of reviews, and even one YouTube channel had on their thumbnail, best Star Trek ever. I don't really see how you can make that assumption. I mean, it's not a knock on the episode at all. After a first episode in a season, you don't know how things are going to play out. So I don't know how you can say this is the best thing, that I've ever seen without really seeing how that stuff plays out. So, that kind of struck me as odd that I saw more than one. It wasn't just one YouTube channel. I saw more than one person say, like, this is the best, Star Trek is back. This is so great. There wasn't enough meat on that bone in the first episode to really make those kind of assumptions for me. But that's just my opinion. Maybe, you feel different, and be sure, let me know in the comments below. But the first episode did keep me engaged. All the plot lines, seemed to be working apart, but will eventually come together. All the characters had something to do. We obviously didn't see all the return of the crew, and that would have been super busy. So I'm glad that they didn't do that. We only had a few people return. But, for the most part, I really did like the episode. The thing that really I didn't really like a ton was the ending. And I'm going to talk about that more, obviously, in spoilers. But there were certain things about the ending that I didn't like. So I was really into it. And then pretty much like in the last 5 minutes, I was just like, oh, no, I hope that's not what I think it is. But I did, appreciate the callbacks. I didn't think it was too heavy in the callbacks. I know in the reviews that I read before the season started, some of the reviews that weren't as kind as the other ones said it was very nostalgic to the point of being ridiculous. Like it relied too much on the nostalgia of Star Trek. I didn't really get that in the first episode. And without really being a spoiler, the episode kind of revolves around a holiday. And when you have a narrative that's based around a holiday or a celebration, sometimes it's easier to work in that nostalgia because nostalgia is associated with holidays and celebration anyway. So, there's even a couple of scenes in the episode where I think they're kind of cognizant of that. But, I especially noticed that there were a lot of callbacks to the Wrath of Khan. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in the spoiler section. But there were a lot of callbacks to, the movies and the Wrath of Khan. And, every character I felt had a purpose in the episode. It wasn't just, this goes back to the, is the nostalgia too heavy? Is it just member berries? I didn't think that things were just thrown in there to be there. We're introduced to some characters. They all seem to have a purpose. So I'm interested in them. I didn't notice any throwaway characters. That part was really great. I especially love the scenes with Riker and Picard. It's an interesting dynamic between those two because now they're really working as equals, but they're more comfortable in their old structure. Even their ranks are mostly ceremonial now. They each mention that they're both giving a speech at this ceremony thing that I kind of talked about. So really, they're pretty much equals. And even another character kind of points that out too, that their ranks now are mostly ceremonial. But you can see in their interactions, especially Riker, I think, that they're more comfortable in the captain and first officer, or admiral and captain, whatever you want to call it, kind of dynamic, and probably more so the captain and first officer. I think they're just more comfortable in that dynamic, but even more so, they don't need to be, because really at this point in their lives, they are pretty much equals. I mean, one is an admiral, one is a captain, but again, it's really more ceremonial, and it's really emphasized, I think, when Seven comes into the story, and you can see how different her relationship is with Picard than to what Riker's relationship is. I love that scene because it shows that, and there are a couple other scenes in the episode too, where not everybody feels the same way about this crew that we do. And it definitely, there are some people that straight out don't like them. So I thought that was really great. And I thought also that it did a really good job of setting the tone for a large threat. It's there, it seems like things are coming from a lot of different angles. You've got one cast member on one mission, and then one cast member on another, and then you've got Riker and Picard. It really, you've got a lot of moving parts, but they seem to be flowing together towards a much larger threat. So I think, especially in the first episode, I think that's very important, and I think they really nailed it. And it wasn't one dimensional in that it's just this one, here comes the shark, so to speak. So I thought that was really great. But like overall, I thought it was a fun episode. It kept me engaged. I liked the callbacks, and I look forward to the rest of the season. But I'm not ready to say it's the best Star Trek ever. With that said, I will now delve into the spoilery section of the review. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, make sure that you jump ahead. The first thing, I really like seeing Laris again. I think it was not confirmed that she was going to return this season, and she was so important to the end of last season that I think it really would have been a cheat to not see her at all. I mean, the way the episode played out, it pretty much looks like we're not going to see her again until maybe the last episode of this season. But just, kind of that kind of felt like we were just flowing into the last season. So I like that. I like that we got to see Laris right away. And I think that means that her and Rafi are the only two characters that were created on Picard to appear in each of the 3 seasons. And they're two of my favorites. So I mean, I liked Elnor a lot. I'd like to see Elnor again. I know that he's not going to be in this last season, but I did like Elnor's character, especially in the first season when he was kind of like a ninja, for Picard. We're not going to see Elnor again, but it's nice to see Laris again. As far as new characters go, I really like Todd Stashwick as Captain Shaw. I kind of felt like I was going to like him. I know the actor from other things, especially the trailer that he debuted in fully. You could kind of tell his attitude towards Picard and Riker. And I really like that. He really set the tone that he's not impressed with them, and that this is, probably a bigger narrative for the rest of the Federation, that maybe not everybody is as impressed with Picard and Riker. We kind of saw that in the first season of Picard, and a little bit in the second season of Picard when he was, asking for help from the Federation. There was something interesting about Todd Stashwick's Captain Shaw. He definitely was not fond of Seven, and especially of her, past as a Borg. He didn't want her to use her name Seven. He wanted to use her. He wanted her to use her birth name. And then we have him making a comment towards Picard as well about being an ex-Borg. In the end credit scene, I don't know if you noticed this, there wasn't really an intro credit scene, but there was like an end credit scene that followed a bunch of like LCARS panels. On one of them was a note about a ship named the USS Constance, and that it had been lost in battle. And the star date connected to the battle at Wolf 359 and the episode Best of Both Worlds, which was also referenced a couple other times in the episode of Picard, The Next Generation. So I believe that ship probably is tied to Captain Shaw. Given his attitude about the Borg, I think you can glean that if the ship was lost in the Battle of Wolf 359, that he probably, lost people in that battle, and that's why he's, prejudiced against Borg right now. This is actually not the first time that we've seen this kind of prejudice against Picard and his association with the Borg. If you remember the first episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, when then Captain Picard met then Commander Sisko was not too happy to see Captain Picard, mainly because of his involvement in the Battle of Wolf 359 and the fact that Sisko lost his wife there. So, this is something that I'm sure Seven and Picard have dealt with before, but, Captain Shaw is not too, he's not hiding at all. he doesn't have any love for any of the ex-Borg. So learning his backstory will definitely be very interesting. One of the characters that was returning that I hardly recognized was Beverly Crusher. And that's why another of the things that I'm not quite sure yet about the first episode is how Beverly was portrayed. I mean, even Riker makes a comment like, by not even having met the new Crusher yet, that she wasn't like the Beverly that he recognized. Traditionally, when stories do this, I hate it. I hate it when we come back to a group of characters after a lot of years and one of them or a multitude of them is completely different. Now, it if it makes sense and we're given, good reasoning as to why the character has changed, that, that can totally change my perception. But I really, I was really surprised at Beverly's actions, the fact that she's shooting people down. And I kind of felt like, kind of during her introduction, we see a lot of relics from her time on The Next Generation. We see orchids, we see, a plaque that she got, we see the case from her dead late ex-husband. And then, we see a character that's a lot different than the one that we last saw. But to be fair, of all the characters from The Next Generation, her character probably had the least amount of character development. And that's not a knock on the actress at all. I don't think she was really given the opportunity to develop the character. I couldn't tell you one plot line she was involved in any of the 4 films that the Next Generation cast was involved with. Maybe an Insurrection. I hardly remember that movie. It's been a while since I've seen it. But, her character did not have a lot to do. And to just say that, she cut everybody off at 20 years and now she's a totally different person. Having a kid is one thing. And, by the end of the episode, we learn that she has a son, but it can't just be that. And I'm going to get back to Jack Crusher because I have thoughts about him too. But, I'm not saying that there isn't a way for the show to make Beverly make sense. If you remember how Dr. Bashir was in the first season of Deep Space Nine compared to how he was at the end of the last season of Deep Space Nine, this was a very changed character, but we got to see that growth. We got to see him in a POW camp. We got to see his interactions with Garrick and how those kind of shaped him into a different character and changed his perceptions on things and things of that nature. And we saw him, tussle with Section 31 and how that continued to shape him. So seeing all that makes that character growth make a lot of sense. But to just say that Beverly had a kid or one thing I really hope they don't do is to say that the reason that Beverly wasn't involved in the second season of Star Trek The Next Generation was because that's when she had Jack Crusher. The reason I say that is because the actor who plays Jack Crusher, Ed Speleers, is 34 years old. So if he's supposed to be playing a 19 or 20-year-old, that doesn't kind of mesh as well as if he's playing a character that's supposed to be in their late 20s, which if he was born during the second season of The Next Generation, that's what would make more sense. So I don't know what they're going to say. They might say that she had him after Nemesis, and that's why she cut everybody off. But again, that would make him 19 years old, and he's 34 years old in real life. So maybe he can pull it off. But to me, that seems a little weird. And if they're going to say that no, she had him in that year that she was gone, that is again, it feels very much against her character. I mean, of all the characters on the show, we saw her be a parent. We saw her be a mother to Wesley. So to say that she had a baby and just left him with relatives or something while she served on the Enterprise and didn't tell anybody about it, that's kind of a bridge too far. But again, I may be wrong. They may say that she had Jack after Nemesis, but then again, you have a 34-year-old actor playing a 19-year-old. It's not unheard of. I think Tom Cruise played 20-year-olds until he was in his 50s. Paul Rudd still looks like he's in his 20s. So maybe that's what they're going with. But even still, again, there's a lot about Beverly that doesn't make a lot of sense right now. First episode, I'm giving them the chance, to kind of fix that. But just after that first episode, I really didn't recognize Beverly. So hopefully there's story points that come in, in the next few episodes that kind of fill in the blanks there. So now let's talk about the other thing that I wasn't too sure about after watching the first episode of Picard, and that was the introduction of Jack Crusher. If you watch my channel and you have been watching my videos, you know that I've had some trepidation about introducing Picard's son to this season. I think it's very much like David Marcus, how they introduced Kirk's son in The Wrath of Khan. And I already mentioned in this video how there were a lot of overt references to the Wrath of Khan in the first episode of Picard. I'm not going to go into them all now, but if you have some time, I did do a breakdown video of the first episode of Picard, which you should definitely check out. And I will link here and in the description. Definitely check that out after you watch this video. And then even an introduction of Jack Crusher, he attacks them just like David Marcus did in his introduction in The Wrath of Khan. And it has something to do with his mother. I mean, I even thought about this the second time I watched the episode after I did my breakdown, which sucks. I wish I mentioned this in the breakdown, that Beverly is wearing a collared jacket that looks almost exactly like the collared jacket that Carol Marcus wore in The Wrath of Khan. So again, there's a lot of connections there between those characters. And I don't want Jack Crusher to just be another David Marcus. That's not the kind of nostalgia that I need. That's just repetitive. That's just doing something again for the sake of doing it and because it was successful the time before. And they wouldn't be the first producers or writers on Star Trek to try and reinvent the magic from Wrath of Khan, because everybody knows that's, the most popular single Star Trek entity that's ever been released. The films tried to do that with Nemesis and to a certain extent, The Undiscovered Country. And they literally did that in the film Star Trek Into Darkness, the sequel to the 2009 Star Trek film, which kind of was like a Wrath of Khan-like film as well. So, Wrath of Khan is kind of the gold mine for Star Trek, and they keep going to it and going to it and going to it. So I'd like them not to go to it again. I'd like them to come up with something that's new, and maybe they did. Again, this is the first episode, but this is why, I can't say this is the best Star Trek ever, because I still have these questions. I still don't know what's going on with Beverly. I don't know what's going on with Jack Crusher, and I haven't seen the main villain yet, although Amanda Plummer in the trailers looks amazing. So I'm very much looking forward to her. I doubt I'll be disappointed, but let me know in the comments, what did you think of the first episode of Picard? Let's try and keep the spoilers out of it just in case there are some people that haven't seen the episode yet. But like I said, overall, I like the episode. I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. This has a chance to be some great Star Trek. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just not ready to, throw my flag in and say, this is the best Star Trek I've ever seen. I don't care about Deep Space Nine. I don't care about Strange New Worlds. This is the best. I'm not ready. I'm not there yet, guys. But let me know if you are. So next, let's talk about this news that I kind of pieced together from Twitter, which I like to do. Twitter can be a gold mine of some horrible, horrible things, but you can also find some news there too. So basically, this first started with Wilson Cruz. He appeared on a podcast with Tig Notaro, who of course is Jet Reno on Discovery, and he hinted that Star Trek would air quote unquote soon. Now, I didn't even report that on my channel because that seems so flippant, but some channels and publications went crazy with it and were like, Discovery's after Picard, Discovery's after Picard. Wilson Cruz, confirms that Discovery's after Picard, which he didn't. I mean, if you listen to the interview, he didn't. He just said it would air soon. Soon could be 3 months, soon could be a year. It depends on your perspective. So Wilson Cruz got in a little trouble for making the statement, and then he had to go back to Twitter to make another statement. So this is what he says. So just so I don't get yelled at later, when I recorded Tig's podcast back in early January and said Star Trek Discovery would be back in the spring, I was guessing. Now I'm actually hearing closer to summer. But what do I know? Nada, apparently. It'll be worth the wait, I promise. So now instead of making it seem like Discovery will be airing after Picard is over on the 20th of April, it now seems that they're going to be after whatever's after Picard. That would mean that Star Trek Strange New Worlds would be the next series to air after Picard and before Discovery, which again would start in the beginning of April. Now, we also have a tweet from the illustrator for Lower Decks, Matt Lazowski. I think I'm pronouncing that name right. Hopefully I am. And his tweet states, done with Lower Decks Season 4 today. Technically still working on it till late August on other tasks. But the BG background designs are done. It's a really ambitious season. Can't wait to see it when it airs. So what that tells me is that Lower Decks is also close to done, but that they'll probably be airing in the fall. Like he says, late August. So that would mean to me that it would be fall. So if I'm plotting this out correctly, that would mean that we would first have Picard, which is airing right now. That goes until April 20th. Now, in the past, Star Trek has released the first episode of a season along with the season finale of another series I know they did that at least once in 2022, maybe twice. So they could do that again this year as well, and they probably will, but I don't think that they will do that with Picard. I think since Picard's finale is a series finale, so I think that they're going to let that episode kind of air by itself, give it its proper due, and then the next week air the first episode of the next series, which, if all this plots out correctly, would be Strange New Worlds. So that means that we would get the first episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds on April 27th. We haven't got a trailer for the second season of Strange New Worlds yet. We got one scene that was released a few months ago. We are still looking out for a trailer, so I would look out for a Strange New Worlds trailer sometime in the next month if they are going to release it in April. So if we go with, again, 10 episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, 10 weeks after April 27th would be July 6th, and that would coincide with the release of Star Trek Discovery. Now, Discovery, they may release the first episode of the 5th season on the same day as the last episode of the 2nd season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. The reason for that is that Strange New Worlds is such a hot property for them right now that Paramount may want to use the momentum of Strange New Worlds and kind of share that with Discovery. So maybe a lot of people who are enjoying Strange New Worlds will now move on to Discovery because now they'll want something more because they enjoyed Strange New Worlds. So that one I could see being released on the 6th of July, or maybe even a week before that. That would leave Lower Decks to release after that, which would be either September 14th or September 7th. And then Prodigy would then release in November, again, around November 23rd. These dates kind of sort of also line up to the way these shows were released in 2022, just a little bit later. So we'll see how it goes, but I think that we can count on Picard, then Strange New Worlds, then Discovery, then Lower Decks, then Prodigy. But let me know what you think in the comments. Is this the lineup that you would like to see, or do you want to see Lower Decks before Discovery, or do you want to see Prodigy next, or do you want to see Discovery next? Let me know in the comments below. Now let's talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now, I know I don't talk about the MCU a ton on this channel. It's kind of hard to talk about the MCU on YouTube since there are so many channels that talk about the MCU. But of all the MCU films, this one is definitely the most science fiction. I mean, this movie is basically like a weird sci-fi version of The Wizard of Oz, with some notable differences, but it's just a really crazy out there movie, especially for the MCU. I thought the plot was very good. I mean, if you gauge it as a movie against all movies, it's probably not one of the best movies ever. But if you gauge it within the vacuum of the MCU film releases, I think it really does quite well. I think it's a better than average MCU movie. The casting's really good. You know, they show an unconventional family that really feels like a family, and you can see them kind of growing together. The CGI is gorgeous. It's definitely the weirdest MCU film yet, and even more so than Guardians of the Galaxy. I know they kind of have the reputation as being the weirdest, version of a team in the MCU, but I think the Ant-Man franchise kind of trumps them in this regard in this movie because it is out there. I mean, there's some crazy stuff, without going into spoilers. I don't think it's spoilery to say that there are like living buildings. Who thought you would see that in a movie? There's this creature that just wants holes. It's really crazy stuff. Just down to the concepts, the characters, the setting. Everything was, up was down, left was right. It was really great. And I was really surprised at how good the performances were, and not just the mains. Paul Rudd is Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd wakes up acting like Paul Rudd. Like I said, he's still somehow 20 years old. He might be a vampire. I don't know what his secret is, but it doesn't seem like it's that hard to be Paul Rudd and be funny as Paul Rudd. He does do some drama in this movie. Some of his motivations are a little clunky in the third act. I think it gets a little kind of crazy. But for the most part, I think he did a fine job. And the rest of the main cast did well. But really, it was the performances of Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas. I did not expect to like them as much as I did. They both have really good scenes, big scenes in the movie. They're integral to the part, both of them very much so. No way this movie happens without those two characters. And I'm going to go into it more of obviously when I talk about spoilers. But I was really surprised how much I liked Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas. Jonathan Majors as the villain, he's just a great actor. He's one of those actors that has a lot of emotion in his face. So you can just read the phone book and you'd probably be just entranced. My younger viewers may not know what a phone book is, but it's like this big book that used to have everybody's phone number in it. But anyway, Jonathan Majors, just a great villain. Again, some of his motivations were clunky. I'm going to talk about that in spoilers. But overall, I think just as an actor, I think that's a great get. I liked him in Loki. It looks like he's also going to be a big part of Loki season 2. He's going to be a big bad for the Avengers. The next Avengers movie is named the Kang Dynasty, and he's going to be the big bad in that movie. So I think it was a decent setup for him. Again, not going into spoilers yet, but I think as an actor, I think he did a phenomenal job. And Catherine Newton is another actor who I didn't really expect to like her performance as much as I did as Cassie Lang, Scott Lang's daughter. You know, if you've been watching the MCU, especially recently, you've probably noticed that in every film and series, they've been introducing new characters that are either in their late teens or early 20s. And eventually, these characters are going to team up together and become the new Avengers and probably take on the name the Young Avengers like they do in the comics. Her character will definitely be on that team. And I have to admit that most of the characters they've introduced so far, I haven't really been that fond of. I mean, it's hard to get good young actors. I mean, they're young people. You know, it's hard to get established actors that are in their late teens and early 20s. But I really liked Catherine Newton as Cassie Lang, and I kind of look forward to her in the future as, you know, her character takes on a couple of different monikers in the comics. At one point, she's a character named Stature, and then she's also Stinger. So we'll see, you know, who she becomes in the MCU. But I really did like her, you know, I liked her arc. Without going into too many spoilers, she had kind of a one-on-one with a villain, one of the lesser villains, and I liked how that played out a lot. It was kind of silly. Then again, the villain was kind of silly too. So again, it really worked. And I really enjoyed the film. I probably enjoyed it a bit more than I thought I would, honestly. Some of the reviews were kind of lukewarm on it. I know before going into the movie, some people were impressed with the movie. Some people said it, you know, they had problems with the plot line, and I'll talk about that in spoilers. But even with some of the plot line and characters kind of not going exactly great in the third act, overall, I thought it was a good movie. Now, this will be the spoiler section of my review. So if you have not seen the film yet, make sure to fast forward to the next section so you don't get any spoilers. So first of all, my favorite part of the film probably is that they brought back the ants. I'm so happy that they didn't just throw away the idea of the ants. You know, the ants were kind of the silliest part of Ant-Man, and I mean other characters have even like made fun of him for it. And it looked like, you know, especially in the Avengers movies when Ant-Man shows up, he doesn't mention the ants at all. All he does is get big and get small, and he kind of forgets about the ants. And of course, we have this big scene in the third act with basically Michael Douglas as Hank Pym saving the day with his army of socialist ants. I thought it was great. I love it when a story reminds you of something about it that you had forgotten. And even with the movie named Ant-Man, I kind of forgot about the ants. I kind of forgot about that they were, you know, an important part of this character's mythos. And boom, you know, Hank Pym shows us, you know, why he's important to the story and why he's there. And basically, the ants save the day. The ants are the reason that they're able to finally win and beat Kang in the end. So I just love that. That was my favorite part of the movie. My second favorite part of the movie, probably, well, no, I'll say my second favorite part of the movie was, like I said, the performances of Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas. Then I love MODOK. I just loved what they did with that character. I just love that they bring back Darren Cross, you know, the villain from the first movie, and turned him into something even greater as MODOK. I love that, you know, he could be really menacing, but also completely ridiculous, which is exactly what the character's like in the comic books. The backstory is completely different in the comic books, but it doesn't really matter. It's just silly. And I also like how it tied into Cassie Lang. It gave her kind of her own arc, and it tied back to their first encounter together when she was just a little girl, and how that moment kind of shaped her into wanting to be a superhero, that, and, you know, obviously her dad being an Avenger. But I just love that. I love that they were able to tie Darren Cross back into the plot with MODOK and make it, you know, he was still a threat, but he was still ridiculous. I love that. Now, some of the things that I didn't really care for. Bill Murray, I think, did not need to be in the film. He was just totally throwaway, and I really don't like when you just have those throwaway characters, and he just really, like, I don't know why his character was there. I understand that he had a backstory with Janet, but I didn't really buy any chemistry they had, and he really was completely disposable. So I don't know why Bill Murray was in the movie. I guess just maybe the director wanted to have Bill Murray in a movie. I don't know. But his part was completely disposable. But now let's talk about Kang, because there are a lot of things that people liked and disliked about Kang. And some of the critiques I understand, but I guess I don't feel as strongly about. The thing that I had a problem with that I don't think is mentioned as much is that after the first film, well, it's hard to say after his first movie because he did appear as a different character in Loki, but as the character Kang, I don't really understand his motivations as to why he's a bad guy. I hate bad guys that are just bad for the sake of being bad. You know, the Cobra Commander, just I'm just a bad guy. Like, I don't think that that's very compelling. And the MCU kind of has a habit of making bad guys that are just bad guys. And if Kang's motivation is that he just has to conquer, that doesn't really do it for me, even with as good as Jonathan Majors is as the villain. Now, I will say that they did establish why Kang would be angry with the main, timeline, which is called Earth 616, because of Janet, because Janet left him in the quantum realm, and that's why he wants to destroy where she lives. That makes perfect sense. That motivation I completely understand. But his greater motivation as a villain, there's one line he has where he says they took everything from me. So maybe this will be fleshed out, in the comics. Kang's motivation is based on a woman, and the MCU doesn't really base a lot of their villains' motivations on love. I mean, Thanos, for instance, his main motivation was to impress the personification of death, which was a female, and that he was in love with. And they totally cut that out of the MCU, which is a good idea. But, we're going to have to find out, I guess, later on with Kang, what his motivation is to be a villain. Right now, I don't understand it. So that kind of takes it away from me a little bit. So those kind of critiques of Kang, I get. But again, it's really his first appearance as Kang. And we saw from the post-credit scene, there are a lot of Kangs. So, that's actually one thing I also love that I didn't mention was the post-credit scenes. In a lot of MCU films, they're really throwaway, and they're like in jokes that like 16 people think are funny. But the two post-credit scenes for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I feel are important to the MCU and that you actually need to stay and watch them. So I think that that's one thing they did well, is that both post-credit scenes really felt like they were meaningful and they weren't just throwing in to, just to be there. But one critique of Kang that I have heard a lot is that it's not a good look that he's going to be the next big bad of the Avengers. The next Avengers film is going to be titled Avengers Kang Dynasty. If he's going to be the big bad, he just got beat by Ant-Man, one of the Avengers, and of course the ants and the rest of the ant family, so to speak, in this movie. So how are you going to have somebody who got beat come back and be your big bad? Now, there's two reasons why I don't think this is fair. One, in the comics, Kang's main power is time. Like, he jumps around, and it's kind of like he did in Loki, where, people jump at him and he can, like, morph to another place, and just like he knows what's going to happen. He always knows what everybody's going to do. So that's kind of his power. Like, that's why nobody can get the jump on him or can trick him, because he's seen everything, because he knows everything that's going to happen all the time. But in this movie, in the quantum realm, Kang doesn't have that power. So he's effectively nerfed while in the quantum realm and not able to use his main, the main trick up his sleeve. So I would argue that it shows how powerful he is to have gained so much power in the quantum realm. And basically, he's just a guy with a suit. He's basically just Iron Man, but he's able to build a whole army and almost take over the universe without his main power. So I don't think that that's a fair kind of knock on him, that because he was beat in a movie, that he can't be the big bad that the Avengers have to face. Also, it might be more compelling to face a villain that has been beaten once and has to pick themselves back up, has to kind of Rocky to it. But basically, if Kang has been defeated and now, hates Janet Van Dyne, hates, Hank Pym, hates Ant-Man, hates the Wasp, hates Cassie Lang, now he's got more of a motivation to, be a big bad and to come back even bigger and badder. So those two things together, I think if you take that into consideration, I don't think that that really makes Kang a bad villain. And I think that as long as we learn his greater motivation later, he has the opportunity to be the best villain that the MCU has had yet, because I think Jonathan Majors is definitely one of the best actors that they've ever had in the MCU. But let me know, what did you think of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania? Did you think it was the best one in the series? I think I did. I've been thinking about it more and more, and I really liked the first movie. I didn't like the second movie as much. At first, I didn't like the third movie as much because some of the aspects of the first two movies weren't in the third one. The third movie is completely different than the first two Ant-Man movies. The stakes are much higher and everything's crazier. So I didn't like it as much at first, but thinking about it more, thinking about it by itself, I really think it's one of the better MCU films. I did like it. So let me know in the comments what you thought of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now let's talk about two movie trailers that were released during the Super Bowl that I'm very excited for. The first being The Flash. Now I'm going to get this out of the way. I'm not going to discuss any of the drama around the film. I just want to talk about the movie and the trailer. It's not that I'm ignoring it. I understand that there is a bigger story and that a lot of people don't want to see this movie because of, Zack Snyder or because of Ezra Miller. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm just going to talk about the movie itself and the trailer. I like the trailer. I'm excited to see the movie. I love seeing Michael Keaton as Batman. The original Batman movie is one of the first movies I can remember seeing as a kid. I believe I was 10 years old when it came out, and I just loved it. I remember seeing it with my dad. I don't care that he is 70. I know a lot of people online have this, critique that I don't believe, Michael Keaton in the bat suit at 70 can do the things he's doing. And it's such a stupid critique because guess what? Nobody can do the things that Michael Keaton is doing as Batman. It's a freaking superhero. Like even a special forces officer in their 20s couldn't do what he's doing in this trailer. It's a fantasy. The GD movie is about a guy who runs so fast, he goes back in time, and people are talking about, I can't see Michael Keaton in a bat suit beating people up. I don't understand, where do you suspend your disbelief? I don't get it. So I don't buy that critique of the film. I love seeing Michael Keaton as Batman. I love seeing Ben Affleck as Batman. I'll discuss the plot here in a bit if you're confused as to how there are two Batmen in this movie. But I think they're drawing a lot from the Flashpoint storyline in the comics, which is one of my favorite storylines that DC has ever put out. So I'm going to talk about the plot here in a little bit, but I have no problem with Michael Keaton as Batman in this movie. In fact, I loved it. I also liked seeing Sasha, I believe her last name is Kali, I hope I'm not pronouncing that wrong, as Supergirl. Her scenes looked really cool. She's emaciated in one scene and she's, fully powered in another. I know that James Gunn is going to put out a Supergirl movie in the next few years. I don't know. I'm almost positive that the character won't be the same character that we see in this movie, but they may keep the actress. He has said that it's not for sure that these actors are done, even though he is now taking over the DC movie slate and TV series, and that most of these parts will be recast. But she could stay on, but her character is definitely going to be different. I know a lot of people are also saying that they don't want to see this movie because now that James Gunn has taken over, the Shazam sequel, the Aquaman sequel, as well as Blue Beetle and this don't really matter. But of all the four movies, The Flash will definitely matter. James Gunn has stated that he thinks this is one of the best superhero movies that he's ever seen in his life. So he's definitely going to keep the plot points from it. He's already said that this will reset the DC movie universe, and that again ties into the plot. So I'll talk about the plot really quick and as it ties into the Flashpoint event in the comics. In the comics, Flashpoint is basically a storyline that reset the DCU into something called the New 52, which are basically 52 titles that came out that were in the 2000s that were supposed to reset the DC universe and make it more modern, because you can't have Superman in his 60s acting like he's 20 and stuff like that. So what it did was it allowed the Flash to go back in time and stop his mother from being killed. If you don't know the backstory of the Barry Allen version of the Flash, the most popular version of the Flash, he became the Flash after becoming a scientist for the police department and getting hit with a bolt of lightning. But his motivation is that his mother was killed when he was very young. And it turns out that his mother was killed by one of his greatest villains. They're going to change that for the movie, but basically because he saves his mother, he changes the entire DC landscape, so much so that Batman actually plays a really big part in the story. And it's not Bruce Wayne as Batman, it's Thomas Wayne, his father. So if you remember Batman's backstory, his parents were killed in front of him. Well, in this new Flashpoint timeline that is created when Barry Allen saves his mother, Bruce Wayne is shot and his parents survive, and each of them kind of go crazy in their own way. Thomas Wayne becoming Batman, and the rest of the story is kind of him working with Batman, trying to fix what's going on. So the film is kind of going to use the Bruce Wayne in the, I guess you could say, Zack Snyder universe, Ben Affleck, as the young Bruce Wayne from the Flashpoint comics. And the older Bruce Wayne is going to be Michael Keaton, who will kind of be taking the role of Thomas Wayne from the comics. So when after Barry Allen changes, the present by going into the past, nobody will have powers, and the only superhero, I believe, will be Batman, and it will be Michael Keaton. The way Supergirl comes into this is kind of playing out the way Superman was in the Flashpoint comic, which is that instead of Superman landing in Kansas, he lands somewhere where he is confiscated by the US government, and they keep him depowered so he can't become Superman. And it looks like in the film, Supergirl is going to take the place of Superman. It looks like the government are hiding her somewhere dark so she can't be powered by the sun. And then once she is powered by the sun, she becomes Supergirl. So that's what we can kind of expect in The Flash. I'm very excited for it. I think it's going to be great. Again, thinking about the drama around the movie, it kind of makes it a little more difficult. But again, talking about suspending disbelief, sometimes I guess you have to suspend belief as well when you want to enjoy a movie. But I'm looking forward to The Flash and look forward to seeing it when it comes out. The next film I want to talk about is the third installment in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. This will be the last film in that franchise. Speaking of James Gunn, he was the director of all three Guardians of the Galaxy films, as well as the holiday special that just came out in 2022. I've liked the films. I like the holiday special. I'm worried about this movie, though. It looks like it's going to be very serious. I always really liked the tone of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and I hope that this one doesn't lose it. We've heard that at least one of the members of the team will not make it out alive, perhaps two. So, I mean, we saw Gamora die in an Avengers movie, and we saw Yondu die in the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie. But, I don't want it to be such a downer. I really like the tone and the weirdness of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So I hope it doesn't lose that too much. I did really like the addition of Will Poulter, I hope I'm saying that name right, as Adam Warlock. I thought he looked really cool. That character is really overpowered in the comics, and I don't think he's going to be like that in the movies, which I think is good. I also think that, speaking of the Young Avengers, I think that he could end up on the Young Avengers as well and be kind of the Thor replacement because he is so powerful. But so far, I have some trepidation about that movie. I hope it's not too serious. There were some silly things in the trailer too, so I hope it keeps that. I hope it's not a movie that makes me sad. I hope it's a movie that makes me happy. The plot of the film seems to center around the character of Rocket, who's voiced by Bradley Cooper. We haven't been given too much of his backstory. We know that at some point scientists did experiments on him and made him the way that he is. We're going to meet that scientist, the High Evolutionary, in this film and kind of see some more of his experiments. And I'm not sure how that ties into the Guardians, but I know that they made an enemy in the second movie, Alaya or something. She was a high priestess. The people that were all dressed in gold. And if you saw the trailer, you see Adam Warlock has a gold face. So he's working for them at first, at least. I think it'll be a good movie. Again, I'm worried about the tone, but it'll be a movie I see. So let me know in the comments. Are you excited for the third entry in the Guardians of the Galaxy? Are you sad that we're not going to see this team again? Or are you just happy with the franchise and it looks like a good movie to you? So now I want to talk about this really interesting story that has to do with the film I Am Legend. And it looks like there's going to be a sequel to that movie, the one that came out in 2007. Now, if you saw that movie, you may remember that Will Smith starred as Robert Neville, and basically the movie follows the very popular book, but the ending is different. The main character sacrifices himself and dies. So you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, if Will Smith died in the first movie, is this like a Emperor Palpatine thing? Like, how is he coming back for the sequel? Well, instead of bringing him back to life, what Akiva Goldsman is doing, and yes, he wrote the first one, and it looks like he's writing this one as well, is he is going with the alternate ending, which was released with the movie when they released it on DVD. And in that alternate ending, Robert Neville survives. And actually, the alternate ending is the one that follows the ending for the book. But I guess when it was released in test screenings with that ending, it didn't do well. So they changed it to the ending that we got, in which Robert Neville, Will Smith's character, sacrifices himself. So they're going to release a sequel to I Am Legend, and it's going to star Will Smith as well as Michael B. Jordan, who starred in many things, including Black Panther and the Creed series. I'm guessing in this film, he's probably going to be Will Smith's character's son, because they have said that Will Smith will also star and produce the film. So I think this is really interesting that they're just saying, we don't care that the film had a different ending when we released it. We're saying this is the actual ending. And, I don't know how they're going to handle that when the film is released. In this new age of streaming, they may even replace the ending that's shown on streaming services with the alternate ending just so it matches up with the sequel. I'm not sure, but I just think that that's crazy that they're going to make a sequel based off the alternate ending. But then again, if you think about how it really matches the book more so than the movie, I think that kind of works well too. But yeah, I guess we're getting a sequel to I Am Legend. Let me know in the comments if you like that film, if you're excited for the sequel, and if you think it's weird that they're basing the sequel off the alternate ending and just completely ignoring the ending that was released with the movie. I can't really remember another movie that did that without really just calling itself a reboot. Usually that's what they do when they ignore something from another movie. They just say, well, this is a reboot, and they're not doing it here. So I don't know. Let me know if you think that's crazy or if it doesn't bother you at all. Well, that's my podcast for this week. Thank you all very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Please remember to hit the like button as well as be subscribed to my channel. Every Monday, I will be releasing these podcasts, and every Thursday, I'll release Star Trek breakdowns of whatever episode is airing. So now we have PICARD, and then whatever's after that, and after that, and after that, I'll be releasing breakdowns. So make sure that you're subscribed and that you hit the bell so you know when those come out. Thank you very much for joining me. I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?